Hi there, and welcome to Coup English. In this series, we explore the lives of amazing people and help you improve your English at the same time. Ready? Let's dive in. The Long Search for Lost Time, The Life of Marcel Proust. Chapter 1. A Sickly Child in a Changing World. In the spring of 1871, just after the Franco-Prussian War and the Paris Commune, Marcel Proust was born in a fragile moment of French history. He entered the world in a small room on the Rue Royale Collard in the elegant 6th arrondissement of Paris. His father, Adrien Proust, was a respected doctor and expert on public health. His mother, Jean Weil, came from a well-educated and cultured Jewish family. From the beginning, Marcel's life seemed to hold a quiet tension between intellect and emotion, science and art, strength and fragility. Marcel was a delicate baby. Soon after his birth, he began showing signs of asthma, a condition that would follow him throughout his life. His breathing attacks were severe and frightening. The doctors warned that any excitement or cold wind could bring on an episode. Because of this, young Marcel was often kept indoors, while other children played outside in the gardens of Luxembourg or the wide avenues of Paris. He spent many of his days behind closed windows, reading, resting, and watching the world through the glass. Despite his illness, Marcel was a deeply sensitive and curious child. His mother became his closest companion and protector. She read him books in French and English, introduced him to music, and spoke to him about art and history. Jean's love and attention helped Marcel develop a rich inner world. When he was too weak to play, he would imagine stories in his head, observe people with great detail, and listen carefully to the sounds of the house and street. He remembered these early experiences with powerful clarity for the rest of his life. His parents took him to the countryside during the summers, hoping the fresh air would strengthen his health. In Ilias, a small town where his father's family lived, Marcel found something he could never find in the city: time. Days in Ilias were slow and filled with quiet moments. There were walks under trees, visits to relatives, and meals with strong smells and deep feelings. Later in life, Ilias would become the model for Combray, the fictional village in his great novel, In Search of Lost Time. But his sickly body often made him feel different from other children. He missed school often. His asthma could be triggered by stress or sudden temperature changes. Sometimes he could not sleep. Sometimes he felt deeply alone. But this solitude became a teacher. He began to observe people's words and gestures more carefully. He listened to conversations with the intensity of someone who might need to repeat them later. Every word, every look, every silence had meaning. Paris was changing around him. The Eiffel Tower would soon rise. The streets were filled with horses, trams, and voices of many classes and cultures. Marcel's father, always logical and orderly, hoped his son would follow in his footsteps and study medicine or law. But Marcel, though intelligent, was drawn to feelings, dreams, and memories. He often wrote small stories and drew scenes from his imagination. His mother supported these interests quietly, giving him the emotional freedom that his physical body lacked. By the time he was 10, Marcel had already read many great authors. He loved Victor Hugo, George Sand, and John Ruskin. Their words helped him understand beauty and time, joy and sadness. At an age when most children played games, he was already reflecting on life. But he was not always serious. He had a sense of humor, enjoyed good food, and laughed easily when he was with people he loved. These early years shaped who he would become. The weakness of his lungs made him stronger in mind. The silence of his room became the stage for his imagination. His mother's gentle care became a lifelong memory of love. And his deep connection to detail, emotion, and memory became the foundation for one of the greatest literary works ever written. For Marcel Proust, the first years of life were not about rushing forward, but about learning how to see the world not just with eyes, but with the full heart. Chapter 2. The Family That Shaped a Dreamer. To understand Marcel Proust, one must first understand the household that surrounded him. The Proust home was filled with both medical books and classical literature, with discussions that ranged from the scientific to the poetic. Marcel's father, Adrien Proust was a doctor of great repute, a professor at the Faculty of Medicine, and a traveler who studied disease prevention in places as far as Russia and Persia. His work was grounded in logic and structure, which often contrasted with his son's wandering, intuitive mind. Adrien was strict, but not cold. He wanted his children, Marcel, and his younger brother Robert, to be strong, successful men. He believed in order, public duty, and intellectual effort. Yet he also saw something in Marcel that confused and sometimes worried him. A quiet, dreamy boy whose strength was not in the body but in thought. Marcel was not made for sports or discipline. He was often in bed, pale and coughing, yet his eyes sparkled when he spoke of books, art, or people's emotions. Jean, while Marcel's mother, was the soul of the household. Educated in both languages and literature, she had a gentle but firm spirit. She read aloud to her sons in English, translated passages from classical texts, and maintained a deep love for music and painting. Marcel adored her. She gave him not only physical care during his many illnesses, but also emotional comfort. She listened closely to his ideas, gave feedback on his early writings, and always protected his right to be different. Jean was Jewish, and though the family was largely secular, her cultural identity would later become important in Marcel's understanding of prejudice, society, and identity. France in the late 19th century was a place of growing nationalism and, at times, cruel anti-Semitism. The Dreyfus Affair, an event Marcel would engage with publicly, revealed deep fractures in society. His mother's heritage, and the quiet pride with which she carried it, taught him to observe injustice and resist it with intellect and empathy. At home, conversations flowed like music. Guests from artistic and academic circles would visit. Family friends included writers, musicians, and philosophers. The Prousts were not wealthy aristocrats, but they had strong social connections. Young Marcel learned how to listen at dinner tables, where adults shared ideas about history, politics, and culture. Though he often remained quiet, he absorbed everything. Robert, his younger brother, followed a more traditional path, eventually becoming a doctor like their father. The brothers were close, but different. Robert liked rules and sports. Marcel preferred silence and reflection. While Robert's world moved forward with clarity, Marcel's was one of echoes, memories, and uncertain feelings. Yet they respected one another deeply, and Robert would later protect Marcel's privacy and reputation. Books were everywhere. The family library was filled with the voices of the past: Balzac, Flaubert, Pascal, Shakespeare. Marcel read greedily and remembered everything. One guest once asked him about a line in Racine, and the boy quoted it back without hesitation. He did not read only for pleasure. He read because it was life itself. Each word opened a new world, and through books, he escaped the limitations of his fragile body. The home was quiet, but not dull. On Sundays, the family took walks in the Bois de Boulogne or visited museums. Marcel would study the light on a painting or the scent of a garden with the care of someone searching for something eternal. These small experiences planted seeds for the memories that would later grow into entire chapters of In Search of Lost Time. Even though Adrien wished Marcel would be stronger, more practical, he never stopped caring for him. He arranged for the best doctors, made sure his son received proper education, and even if silently respected Jean's nurturing style, there was tension, yes, but there was also love. It was a household of differences and devotion, of structure and softness. In this environment full of books, care, conversation, and subtle contradictions, Marcel Proust began to form his deepest self. He was a dreamer, but one grounded by a family that, though often puzzled by his nature, gave him the space to grow. In the safety of his home, Marcel began to observe life not only as something to be lived, but as something to be remembered and transformed. And it was within the walls of that home, both physical and emotional, that the foundation of one of the world's most sensitive writers quietly took shape. Chapter 3: Schooling, Society, and the Seeds of Sensitivity. When Marcel Proust entered school, it was both a necessity and a challenge, because of his asthma, which often flared during weather changes or emotional stress. His attendance was sometimes inconsistent. Yet, when he was present, it was clear that his mind was already years ahead of his peers. He was enrolled at the Lycée Condorcet, one of the best schools in Paris. Its long hallways and rigorous classrooms were filled with future scholars, writers, and politicians. Marcel, dressed in tailored clothes and often carrying a handkerchief, stood out. He was quiet, observant, and intensely curious. While some boys played loudly in the yard, he often stayed near the walls, reading or watching. He was not alone in the traditional sense. He had classmates, but his world was more internal. He learned quickly, not just the subjects, but how people behaved, their vanity, their fears, their ambitions. All of this would appear later in his writing. At Lycée Condorcet, Marcel showed great skill in literature and philosophy. He was deeply influenced by his teachers, especially those who encouraged critical thinking and self-expression. He began to write short essays and poems. Some were exercises for class, others were private, written late at night after coughing fits. His teachers noticed both his talent and his frailty. They praised him, but gently. Despite his illness, Marcel formed strong friendships during these years. One of his closest friends was Jacques Bizet, the son of the famous composer Georges Bizet. The two shared interests in art, music, and letters. Through Jacques, Marcel gained access to cultural salons, gatherings where artists, writers, and intellectuals debated and performed. He observed, listened, and quietly recorded impressions that would one day become characters. Marcel also experienced his first major emotional conflicts during this period. He began to understand that he was different, not only physically, but also in terms of desire and temperament. The school environment, often filled with rigid ideas of masculinity and success, made his sensitivity stand out even more. He learned to hide parts of himself, to blend in when needed, but also to preserve his inner world. This double life, the one seen by others and the one felt deeply inside, would become central in his future novels. By the time he graduated, Marcel had already published essays in literary journals. He was only a teenager, but his style was developing. Long, winding sentences, filled with detail, emotion, and subtle irony. He was beginning to find his voice, even if he did not yet know where it would take him. Outside school, society was shifting. The Belle Epoque, a period of cultural flowering and relative peace in France, was in full bloom. Cafes were filled with talk of new inventions, scientific discoveries, and bold artistic movements. Impressionist painters were changing how people saw the world. Writers like Zola and Maupassant were exploring the darker corners of society. Proust, ever the observer, walked through this world with eyes wide open. He visited art galleries, attended concerts, and read everything he could find. Museums and libraries were his sanctuaries. He kept notebooks filled with ideas, descriptions, and questions. What is beauty? How does memory work? Can time be captured on a page? These were not just passing thoughts. They were the early roots of his life's work. Still, Marcel faced limits. His health remained fragile, and his parents worried. They hoped he would choose a stable profession, law or diplomacy, but Marcel resisted. He enrolled in law school briefly, then switched to the École Libre des Sciences Politics, but his heart was never in it. He did what was expected, but his mind wandered elsewhere. One evening, while reading Ruskin in the quiet of his room, he felt a shift. The English art critics' detailed descriptions of architecture and landscapes resonated deeply with him. Here was someone who believed that careful observation could be sacred. Marcel began translating Ruskin's work, and in doing so, found a model for the kind of writing he dreamed of, precise, emotional, and reverent toward beauty. By the end of his school years, Proust had grown into a young man who was both aware of his fragility and firm in his sensitivity. He had walked through classrooms, salons, and city streets gathering impressions like someone collecting light through a lens. He had not yet written his masterpiece, but the seeds had been planted in his school essays, in his silent reflections, and in the fine details of everyday life that most others missed. More than knowledge, school had taught him how to see, not just the surface of things, but their texture, their tone, their quiet resonance. And it was this way of seeing, this attentive gaze, that would become his gift to the world. Chapter 4. Love, Loss, and the First Letters. As Marcel moved into young adulthood, emotions took deeper root in his life. Love, in all its forms, idealized, unspoken, and sometimes painful, began to shape both his days and his writing. During these years, he became more socially active, attending elegant gatherings and salons, often alongside his friend Jacques Bazet. There, he met a dazzling array of artists, aristocrats, and socialites. And with each encounter, he collected impressions like a painter capturing fleeting colors. Among the people who stirred his imagination was a young woman named Marie de Benedacchi. She was charming, artistic, and came from a noble Russian-French family. Marcel was captivated by her. Although it is unclear whether he truly loved her or was fascinated by her place in society, she became one of the many inspirations behind his future female characters. He admired her grace, but more than that, he was fascinated by the layers of emotion she carried beneath the surface, a trait that would appear in the women of his future novels. Still, Marcel's deepest emotional experiences were not limited to romantic encounters. He felt things intensely, the loneliness he often carried, the weight of unexpressed longing, and the delicate nature of his own desires created a complex inner world. Though he was surrounded by friends and admirers, there was always a sense of distance, a quiet melancholy that he never shook off. This sadness was not destructive, however. Instead, it pushed him to observe more carefully, to describe more precisely. He also began to mourn things he hadn't lost yet: moments, people, feelings. In a letter to a friend, he wrote that beauty seemed to pass too quickly, and that he feared forgetting the things that had once moved him. This fear of forgetting, of losing time, would eventually become the central theme of his life's work. During this period, Marcel started writing more seriously. He contributed short pieces to literary journals, including Le Banquet and La Revue Blanche. These were small essays, sketches of scenes, and portraits of people, nothing that would make headlines, but full of promise. In these writings, we see the early signs of the literary style that would later define him: long sentences that mimic the rhythms of thought, subtle emotional layers, and careful attention to social detail. It was also at this time that he began working on what could be considered his first major literary attempt, Jean Santoyo, a novel he never finished but one that holds many ideas he would later explore in his great work. Jean Santoyo is filled with reflections on memory, love, society, and art. Though unfinished, it shows that Marcel was already thinking about the major themes that would preoccupy him for the rest of his life. But even as he wrote about love and beauty, loss was never far behind. One of his close friends, Bertrand de Fenelon, died suddenly. The event shook Marcel deeply. The grief was more than sadness. It felt like a piece of the world had vanished. He became more withdrawn for a time, retreating into books and memory. Loss did not paralyze him. Rather, it taught him that every joy carried with it the shadow of eventual disappearance. This emotional insight would later give his writing its unique emotional power. Marcel's relationship with his mother also deepened during this period. She remained his closest emotional support, reading his drafts, discussing literature, and protecting his health with tireless care. Their bond was unusually strong, and she often played the role of both parent and friend. To Marcel, her presence was essential, like the air he breathed. Her refined intellect and nurturing attention gave him both confidence and comfort. In quiet moments, Marcel would return to their summer home in Ilias, later renamed Ilias-Combray, where he found peace and inspiration. The little garden, the smell of Madeleine cakes soaked in tea, the light through the shutters, these sensations remained in his memory like sacred images. Years later, they would reappear in the most famous pages of his novel, but at the time, they were simply memories he wanted to keep forever. By his mid-20s, Marcel had become a man of society, letters, and deep private feeling. His voice, both personal and literary, was growing stronger. He had begun to write about the delicate joys and aches of human experience. those quiet moments of love and loss that seem small, but stay with us forever. The first letters of his great story were already written. They simply had not yet been arranged into the long, winding sentences of remembrance that would one day make him immortal. Chapter 5. A Gentleman's Life and Literary Beginnings. In the years following his early publications and unfinished novel, Jean Santoyo, Marcel Proust's life appeared from the outside to be that of a cultured gentleman with little urgency. Though he remained somewhat delicate in health, he embraced the charms of high society. His days were spent in stylish apartments, at theaters, salons, or in carriages riding through the streets of Paris. At night, he dined with aristocrats, artists, and intellectuals, yet underneath this leisurely surface, something more serious was growing, a quiet commitment to observation, to memory, and to craft. Proust became a known figure in the Parisian social scene, especially in literary and artistic circles. He had the rare ability to listen with great attention and remember conversations with near-perfect detail. Friends were often surprised when he later recounted entire exchanges, word for word, including the emotions they carried. It was during this time that he sharpened his understanding of human behavior, not as a critic or moralist, but as someone watching from within. Despite his outward charm, Proust continued to struggle with feelings of isolation. He found it difficult to be truly close to others, particularly because of the unspoken aspects of his personal life. As a homosexual man in a time when same-sex relationships were socially unacceptable, Marcel often hid his deepest feelings. These hidden parts of himself, his longing, his fears, and his quiet resistance to convention would all become crucial elements of his later work. He began to learn how to hide truth in fiction and reveal emotion through metaphor. He wrote little during these years, but read widely. He revisited the classics, particularly the works of Stendhal and Balzac, and immersed himself in the philosophy of Henry Bergson. He also admired English literature, reading the works of John Ruskin with great care. Ruskin's sensitivity to art, architecture, and nature had a lasting influence on Marcel. So deep was this influence that Proust translated two of Ruskin's major works into French, Sesame and Lilies, and the Bible of Amiens. Translating Ruskin was not simply an academic exercise. It was a form of apprenticeship, a way to train his ear for tone, his mind for rhythm, and his heart for meaning. Working on these translations alongside his mother, who helped with difficult English passages, also deepened their bond. These projects brought together everything he valued: language, family, beauty, and memory. Although Marcel was not publishing major works at this time, he was not idle. He was slowly building a reservoir of observations and reflections, storing them in notebooks and letters. He paid attention to how people spoke, how they changed their tone depending on who was listening, how memory colored the past, and how time shaped perception. He did not yet know that all of this would become part of his life's work, but instinctively he kept collecting. At the same time, Proust remained fascinated by the rituals of high society. He attended weddings, funerals, and formal balls, always watching. His eye for detail allowed him to see both the grace and absurdity of aristocratic life. He once described a duchess's gesture during a dinner party with such precision that even those who had been present felt they had not truly noticed it until he wrote it down. His society observations would one day find their way into the vivid, layered portraits in his fiction. By his early 30s, Marcel was well known in Paris, but not for his writing. Many thought of him as a sensitive man with promise, but not one who would change literature. He had charm, wit, and a deep sense of beauty, but no published masterpiece. Some even believed he had given up on serious literary ambition. Yet, quietly, almost secretly, something had begun to stir. Marcel started writing again, not to impress others, but to answer something inside himself. He no longer wanted to simply reflect society. He wanted to explore time, memory, and the full range of human experience. The early seeds of what would become In Search of Lost Time were being planted, one silent page at a time. What made Marcel unique was not just his talent, but his patience. He did not rush. He waited for the right words, the right tone, the right voice. He wrote letters to friends and drafts of scenes, trying to find a new way of writing that was closer to thought itself. Literature, for Marcel, was not just a mirror of life. It was a second life, one that could hold on to the moments that real life always seemed to let go. And so, beneath the surface of quiet dinners and slow days, Marcel Proust began to build something invisible and immense. His life as a gentleman, the parties, the salons, the long afternoons of conversation, was not a distraction. It was research. It was memory. It was, in its way, the preparation for a literary journey that would reach deeper than almost any before or since. Chapter 6. The Long Silence and a Mother's Death. By the time Marcel Proust entered his mid-30s, a shift began to unfold in his life. His charming presence in salons had started to fade, replaced by increasingly frequent stays indoors. The asthma that had troubled him since childhood grew worse, and long nights spent in drafty rooms took their toll. He withdrew more and more from society, but this retreat was not only due to illness, it was also a quiet turning inward. It was during this time of deep reflection and growing silence that Marcel began to experience one of the greatest personal losses of his life. His mother, Jean Proust, had always been more than just a parent to him. She was his confidant, his intellectual partner, and, often, the one person who could calm his nervous spirit. The relationship had remained close into adulthood. Even as Marcel grew more independent, he continued to rely on her emotional presence and guidance. Theirs was a bond shaped by shared interests in literature and culture, but also by unspoken understanding and warmth. In 1905, Jean Proust died after a period of illness. Her death left a profound emptiness in Marcel's life. He was devastated, crushed by grief in a way that made the world feel hollow and without color. For weeks, he could hardly speak to anyone. He stopped attending events, stopped writing letters, and struggled even to eat or sleep. His sorrow was not dramatic or loud, it was quiet and consuming, a constant ache that he carried inside. Her passing marked the beginning of a long silence. For 3 years, Marcel wrote almost nothing. He retreated into his room, curtains drawn, the air filled with the smell of medicine and silence. The loss of his mother had taken with it his sense of direction. He wandered through memories, through old letters and photographs, trying to hold on to pieces of her presence. During this time, he kept a notebook where he recorded fragments of thought and lines of imagined dialogue, seeds that would one day grow into the vast garden of his masterpiece. It was also during this period that he began to experience time differently. Without the structure of daily visits, letters, or social outings, the hours melted into one another. Sometimes he slept during the day and wrote at night. Sometimes he did neither. But what he did do was think, and what he thought about most was time, how it changes us, how it moves too fast or too slow, and how memory brings back what seems lost. Marcel's understanding of memory began to deepen. He realized that memories were not simply stored experiences, but living things colored by emotion, reshaped by time, and often triggered by the smallest sensations. The taste of a Madeleine cake dipped in tea, the feel of a warm coat, the sound of footsteps on gravel, these tiny experiences could open doors to entire worlds in the past. Though his silence seemed unproductive to others, something profound was happening beneath it. Marcel was reordering his life in his mind, revisiting people, moments, and emotions from earlier years. He began to see his own story as a tapestry, each thread a memory connected to another, forming patterns he had never seen before. This way of thinking would become the central structure of his future writing. Eventually, after 3 years of deep mourning and inner stillness, Marcel began to write again. It started slowly, a paragraph here, a reflection there, but the energy was returning. He began drafting a novel that attempted to capture what he had felt, what he had lost, and what still remained. He was no longer trying to write like other authors. He had found his own voice, shaped by grief, solitude, and deep memory. The death of his mother had changed him forever. It had taken something from him, but had also given him something. The knowledge that what seems gone can still live within us. That a person's presence can echo through memory, through small moments and sensations, and even through pages of a book. Marcel was beginning to write not just for himself, but for her, for the love they had shared and the time they could no longer share. It would take years more for this writing to take full form, but the silence had been necessary. In losing his mother, he had come closer to the heart of his art. He was no longer a writer of society pages or salon conversations. He was becoming something else entirely, a writer of time, of memory, and of the invisible ties that bind us to the past. Chapter 7. In Search of Time and Meaning. After years of quiet reflection and the painful loss of his mother, Marcel Proust found himself standing at the edge of a new beginning. His days remained mostly spent indoors, shielded from the harsh light of the outside world, but his mind was opening wider than ever before. The silence he had lived in for so long was now giving way to a restless desire to understand life's deeper meaning, especially the nature of time and memory. Marcel's illness still kept him confined, but this limitation became a strange kind of freedom. Without the distractions of society, he could focus intensely on his inner world. He began to write again, not as a social exercise or a public performance, but as a personal journey. His notebook filled with ideas, scenes, and fragments of conversations. He worked slowly, carefully, as if each word had to be perfectly chosen to capture the elusive truths he sought. The concept of time fascinated him more than anything else. He noticed how moments in life seemed to vanish quickly. Yet, some memories could return suddenly, triggered by something small, a smell, a sound, a taste. This idea would become central to his work. Time was not simply a line moving forward, but a complex web, where past and present intertwined. In this search, Marcel also explored the idea of identity. He asked himself who we really are if our memories shape so much of what we feel and think. Are we the same person we were years ago, or are we constantly changing as time flows? These questions became puzzles that his writing tried to solve. Marcel's health remained fragile, but his spirit grew stronger. He found inspiration in the quiet moments of everyday life. The sound of rain against a window, the light falling on a garden, the slow ticking of a clock, each became a doorway to reflection. Through his writing, he tried to capture not just events, but the feelings and thoughts hidden beneath them. During this time, he also deepened his friendships with fellow writers and artists who understood his vision. They encouraged him to continue, even when his progress was slow. Marcel knew that his path was different from others. He was not interested in immediate success or fame. His goal was to create a work that could hold the complexity of human experience, flaws, beauty, sorrow, and joy, all wrapped together in the flow of time. The long hours spent in solitude were not easy. Marcel often felt lonely and frustrated. But these struggles gave his writing depth. He learned to observe himself and others with compassion, understanding the fragile nature of life. His notebooks grew thick with reflections on love, jealousy, art, and society. These thoughts would later form the rich layers of his novel. Slowly, the outline of what would become In Search of Lost Time began to take shape. Marcel worked on capturing the delicate interplay between memory and reality. He wanted readers to experience the surprise of remembering, the bittersweet feeling of things lost but not forgotten. His writing style became unique, long, flowing sentences that moved like thoughts themselves, sometimes wandering, sometimes returning to a central idea. This chapter of his life was a turning point. From the quiet rooms where he wrote, Marcel Proust was building a new way to tell stories, one that did not just describe the outside world, but reached inside the human mind and heart. His exploration of time and meaning promised to change literature forever. As his work continued, Marcel knew that his journey was far from over, but each page brought him closer to understanding himself and the mysterious flow of life. Through his words, he invited others to join him, to look back with new eyes, to find beauty in memory, and to see how the past is never truly lost. Chapter 8. The Birth of a Literary Masterpiece. Marcel Proust's life entered a new phase as his reflections on time, memory, and identity began to take a clear shape in the form of a literary project, unlike any before. The quiet rooms of his Paris apartment became his workshop, where days and nights blended into long hours of writing. Though his health was fragile and often unpredictable, his determination to create something lasting grew stronger. The novel he envisioned was vast, a journey through life's hidden moments, told through the eyes of a narrator who recalls his past in vivid detail. This work would later become, In Search of Lost Time, a monumental piece of literature that would stretch across 7 volumes. But at this early stage, it was a dream, a promise that slowly took form on the page. Marcel understood that ordinary stories were not enough. He wanted to capture the way memory works, how it awakens unexpectedly, often through simple triggers, a taste, a scent, a sound that flood the mind with images and feelings from the past. One famous scene involved the taste of a madeleine dipped in tea, which unlocked a cascade of childhood memories. This moment symbolized the heart of his writing, how small experiences hold the power to connect us to lost time. Writing was a slow and demanding process. Marcel often revised the same passage many times, searching for the exact words and rhythms that would express his thoughts most clearly. He resisted rushing or settling for easy explanations. Instead, he embraced complexity and depth, trusting that readers would find meaning in the richness of his language. His social life became even more limited as he focused on his work. He avoided large gatherings and bright lights, preferring the quiet company of a few close friends. His mother's death still weighed heavily on him, but he carried her memory as a guiding light. She had encouraged his love of literature and had been a strong supporter of his talents. Writing became a way to honor her and keep her close. Marcel's style was unlike anything in the literary world at the time. His sentences were long and flowing, filled with detailed observations and subtle emotions. He moved beyond traditional storytelling to create a new kind of narrative, one that mirrored the workings of the human mind, with its shifts, returns, and surprises. This approach challenged readers to slow down and experience the story in a deeply personal way. The publication of the first volume, Swan's Way, in 1913, was a quiet event. It did not immediately bring fame or wealth. Some critics found the style difficult and the story unusual, but those who understood its beauty praised its originality and emotional power. Slowly, word spread among literary circles that something remarkable had been created. Marcel continued writing through World War I, even as the world outside was engulfed in chaos. His focus on memory and time took on new significance in this context. The war reminded everyone how fragile life was and how quickly moments could be lost. For Marcel, it was a call to preserve the richness of human experience through art. The novel grew with each volume, exploring not only personal memories but also social changes, love, jealousy, and the passage of time itself. Characters appeared and reappeared, weaving a complex tapestry of human life. Marcel's deep understanding of society and his sharp observations made his work both a personal journey and a broad reflection on his era. Though his health continued to limit him, Marcel Proust poured his energy into writing. His literary masterpiece was not just a book, it was a new way of seeing the world, an invitation to readers to look inside themselves and discover the hidden connections between past and present. In Search of Lost Time would eventually become one of the greatest achievements in literature, influencing countless writers and thinkers. But in these early years, it was still a work in progress, an extraordinary effort born from years of silence, sorrow, and patient observation. Marcel's life and writing were now inseparable. His novel was his life's work, a reflection of his deepest thoughts and feelings. And through this work, he was about to leave a mark on the world that would last far beyond his own time. Chapter 9. Solitude, Struggle, and Final Volumes. As Marcel Proust entered the later years of his life, his existence became increasingly solitary. The world outside his windows seemed distant and sometimes harsh, but inside his small rooms in Paris, A rich universe was taking shape, one built from words, memories, and deep reflection. His health, always fragile, worsened steadily, confining him more and more to his bed. Yet, despite this physical decline, his creative spirit burned brightly, fueled by an urgent desire to complete his life's work. The years during and after World War I brought challenges not only to society, but to Marcel himself. The war changed the world in profound ways. Old social orders crumbled, and new ideas emerged. Marcel's novel, deeply rooted in the traditions and manners of the French aristocracy, began to face a new context. But rather than turning away from these changes, he used them to enrich his storytelling, showing how time reshapes people and places. Writing became a battle. The long sentences and detailed descriptions demanded intense concentration, and Marcel often struggled with exhaustion and breathing difficulties caused by his asthma. Friends and assistants helped him during this time, reading passages aloud and taking dictation when he could no longer write himself. The process was slow and painful, but Marcel refused to give up. The final volumes of In Search of Lost Time were a labor of love and determination. His relationship with solitude was complex. On one hand, it isolated him. On the other, it allowed him to explore his memories and thoughts without distraction. He developed a heightened sensitivity to the world around him, noticing subtle shifts in light, sound, and emotion that others might miss. These small details became essential parts of his writing, bringing his narrative to life. Despite his reclusive lifestyle, Marcel's mind remained sharp and deeply engaged with the themes of love, jealousy, art, and social change. He continued to observe human nature with a clear and compassionate eye, revealing both the beauty and the flaws of his characters. His exploration of memory grew richer, showing how the past is never truly gone, but lives on in unexpected ways. During these years, Marcel also faced moments of doubt and loneliness. He sometimes questioned whether his work would ever find a wide audience or be fully understood. Yet, his love for literature and his belief in the power of memory kept him going. Writing was not just a task, it was a way to give meaning to his life and to the lives of others. The last volumes of his novel were published between 1922 and 1927, with Marcel still revising and refining his text even as his strength faded. He saw In Search of Lost Time not only as a story but as an experience, an invitation for readers to dive into their own memories and reflections. The work's deep humanity and philosophical insights set it apart from anything that had come before. In these final years, Marcel's influence grew quietly but steadily. Fellow writers and thinkers recognized the originality and depth of his achievement. Though fame was not his goal, his novels slowly gained recognition as a masterpiece. Marcel Proust's life was nearing its end, but his literary journey was reaching its full expression. The struggle, the solitude, and the pain had all been part of the process, a process that created a new way to understand time, memory, and human experience. His final volumes stand as a testament to his patience, insight, and extraordinary dedication to his art. Copyright notice, Co-English channel, all rights reserved. This video and its content are protected by copyright law. Unauthorized copying, redistribution, re-uploading, or modification of this content is strictly prohibited and may result in legal action. Respect the creator. Do not steal. Chapter 10. Legacy Beyond the Pages. Marcel Proust's final days were marked by quiet reflection and the deep fulfillment of completing his life's work. Though his body weakened from illness, his mind remained vibrant, focused on the novel that had consumed much of his existence. He understood that the journey he had undertaken exploring memory, time, love, and loss would outlive him, touching readers far beyond his own lifetime. Proust passed away in 1922, but his influence was just beginning to spread. In Search of Lost Time gradually gained recognition as one of the greatest achievements in literature. Scholars, writers, and readers around the world found in his work a profound meditation on what it means to be human. His detailed, introspective style inspired new ways of storytelling, encouraging others to explore the depths of consciousness and memory. Beyond the literary world, Proust's exploration of identity and time resonated with broader audiences. His ability to reveal the hidden layers of emotion beneath everyday moments offered comfort and insight to those searching for meaning in their own lives. His dedication showed how patience and deep observation could transform personal experiences into universal truths. The care with which he chose his words and shaped his narrative reminds readers of the beauty found in the slow, thoughtful process of creation. In the years following his death, Proust's work was translated into many languages, reaching a global audience. His influence extended beyond literature into philosophy, psychology, and the arts. Writers like Virginia Woolf, Jorge Luis Borges, and Samuel Beckett acknowledged the profound impact of his novel on their own work. Marcel Proust's legacy is more than just a book. It is a lasting invitation to understand life through the lens of memory and time. His storytelling shows that even the smallest moments can hold great significance, and that our past is always with us, shaping who we are. For learners of English and literature alike, Proust's story is inspiring. It encourages patience, curiosity, and a love for the richness of language. Through his life and work, we see how the power of storytelling connects us across time, culture, and experience. As readers continue to explore in search of lost time, Marcel Proust's voice remains alive, a gentle guide through the complexities of human life and the endless search for meaning within the passing of time. Thanks for learning with Ku English. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.